Welcome back to my channel, Ross here. And I want to admit something. I didn't grow up as a reader. I wasn't the kid staying up late finishing books. I certainly wasn't the person who always had a novel on me. And if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have told you I'm not a reader. One book a year was an achievement. But in my 30s, that completely changed. And it didn't happen because I suddenly became more disciplined or I forced myself to read more. It happened because my life changed and reading was the only thing that fit into it. Let me explain why. One of the biggest turning points for me was actually having a child. And as a child will do, it turned everything upside down. Because suddenly all the hobbies I used to rely on didn't work anymore. Gaming, for example, even if you can pause, you're right in the middle of something. Usually you're committed and you're locked in. In my case, I used to wear headphones. Nothing could beat getting zoned in on God of War. Boy, don't be sorry, be better. Could you imagine pausing that halfway through? Don't be sorry, be what? Be what? Same with film and TV, it feels strange to stop midway through. It just sort of kills the vibe and the momentum. But reading was different for me. I found I could stop instantly and not feel like I was wasting anything. As soon as the baby would start to cry, just close that book. And that's it. And after the baby was calm, I would just pick that book right back up and continue right where I left off. And that flexibility made it the first hobby I had that actually worked with my life, instead of me trying to force my new life around it. Before becoming a father, I went through a pretty tough period of anxiety. This would show itself in panic attacks, constantly overthinking, that sort of thing. And this is where reading became more than just a hobby. Because reading demands your full attention. You can't half read a book. If your mind starts drifting, you notice immediately. And you have to consciously bring yourself back into the story. And for me, that felt a lot like meditation. It gave me a way to interrupt anxious thoughts instead of just sitting there and letting my mind spiral. And that is why I actively encourage other people to read. I think a lot of us now are just constantly overwhelmed. Sensationalism, notifications, news, noise, all of it is just constantly pulling at your attention. And yes, there is a time and place for those things. But reading was the only thing that asked me to focus on just one thing. And during that time of my life, I really needed that. And then there's the escape side of it, which I think people sometimes dismiss. But honestly, sometimes being able to step in somebody else's shoes, even if just for an hour, can be so grounding. Not in a run away from your life kind of way, but in a way that gives you a chance to take a break from your own head. You're thinking somebody else's thoughts, seeing through somebody else's perspective, and during a difficult time, that kind of shift can be really important. I also think something changed in how I approached reading. Because when you're younger, there's a lot of pressure around it. You feel like you should be reading the classics or the important books. And then when you don't enjoy it, you assume there's something wrong with you or that reading isn't for you. But at some point, I just stopped caring about that. Yes, I want to be told about books that might appeal to me, but I no longer feel guilty if I no longer just go start reading that book. And once I let go of that, the pressure just fell away and reading opened up. And another thing I didn't expect was just how much the community side would matter. Because reading is a solitary hobby. But finding Book Talk, BookTube and Bookstagram, suddenly it didn't feel like that anymore. I don't have a lot of friends or family who are big readers. But here online, there were conversations, recommendations, people getting excited about books. And for me, especially moving into that dad era of life, that really clicked. It made reading feel shared, even when I was doing it alone. And I think that's part of why I started this channel. Because reading stopped feeling like something I did on my own and started feeling like something I wanted to share. So if you're kind of in that same place, whether you've always been a reader or you're just starting to find your way into it, you're very welcome here. And if you want to stick around, subscribing genuinely does help the channel grow. There's also something just really satisfying about reading. When I first kicked off this reading habit, I was reading about one book a month and it was about a 300-page book. So going from that to finishing a 1,000-page book in 10 days, not because I was forcing it, but because I genuinely wanted to read it, was amazing. And that feeling of being immersed, making progress and actually finishing something, it's so hard to replicate. And this might be my favourite thing about reading. 100 people can read the same book and experience 100 different versions of it. The characters look different, the world feels different. It becomes yours. And until there's an adaptation, hello Brandon Sanderson,
Hello Apple TV,
that version only exists in your head, which makes it feel so wonderfully personal. So for me, becoming a reader in my 30s wasn't random. It was my life changing, my priorities shifting, and finally finding something that actually fit. And at some point, it stopped being about reading more books and became just a part of who I am. And I think that's the part most people don't talk about enough. You don't become a reader by forcing it. You become one when reading finally makes sense in your life. Plus, the stories are effing fantastic. If you've stuck around to the end, I'd love to know, did you also start reading at a later age, or have you always been into reading? Until next time.